What's going on, everybody? It's RoarYJ coming at you with a brand new video. So of course, it is that time of the month again, where we go ahead and make our monthly tier list for the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. And of course, given the December 2022 Forbidden and Limited list, it's definitely gonna adjust things a little bit in terms of how we view the format. So I know we did just have YCS Costa Rica, however, because that doesn't really fall under the new ban list, and also because there's like absolutely no information about it online other than top 4 from a Facebook post, I'm not really going to be covering anything about that, though props to Jesse Cotton for taking first place with the Shizu tier, very proud of him for that. But yeah, this tier list will be taking into account the most recent ban list, because it is definitely going to shape the format a little bit, even though I don't think too much is going to change overall. However, I do still have a few new decks that I had not had in the last tier list, and I have changed up the tiers just a little bit, and by that, I mean that I have specifically the tier limit tier rather than meta changing, which of course is going to be taken by tier limit itself. I still think even after the Forbidden and Limited list, tier is just going to be a tier 0 deck, or at least like a super high tier 1. I feel like that, you know, 3 macro, 3 die-fi isn't really going to do too much. Even with Constellar Diamond and everything, I feel like that's more of a rogue deck thing or the mirror match. And so I feel like it's still just going to be tier pitting itself against tier. But as for the rest of the tier list, it'll be similar to how the last one was, in which it's basically, can this deck beat tier very well, and what else can it do for the other matchups? But I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get right into the proper part of my competitive Yu-Gi-Oh tier list for the December 2022 format, post Forbidden and Limited list. I think that was the most scuffed tier list opening I've ever had. Anyways, starting us off, we have Tri-Brigade, and what kind of Yu-Gi tuber would I be if not to plug one video within another video? So, Tri-Brigade just got a lot of good help from the Forbidden and Limited list, not only with 3 Tenki for any of your Tri-Brigade builds, especially ones like Lunalight that really benefit from it, but also with Lyrilusk Recital Starling coming to 2, which I'm sure that you've all seen me be super hype about, especially in my ban list reaction itself. Yeah, Lyrilusk Recital Starling at 2 is awesome for the bird up strategy, which I did just post a combat tutorial and updated deck profile for the list, which you should totally go check out if you haven't already. You get so much more flexibility with the deck and all the end board things you can do, as well as just the consistency and ability to play through hand traps, and I think personally that it has bumped itself up from the everything else category up to tier 2. Remember, DD Crow is hella searchable with Recital Starling, and now that you have multiple, you can do it more than once per turn. On top of that, being able to set up things like Herald of Arclight is amazing, as well as many materials on an Appaloosa, and then your choice of either Draco Future, Ensemble, Double Dragon Lords, and Tri-Brigade Revolt. Your end board is just super massive most of the time if you can combo off, which is really easy, especially now with 3 Tenki, and your opponent's going to have a very hard time outing it, with the main problem of course lying within the Ishizu cards as well as shifter-like effects, because that will hurt your graveyard plays, even though the Lyrilusk cards can kind of play through those. But yeah, I think Tri-Brigade variants, especially Bird Up, are going to be a lot more represented this format, and I feel like you can definitely see one sneak into the top cut here and there. So next up we have Dinosaur, and I don't even remember having Dinosaur in my last tier list, which is weird considering I have it in every single other one. But I think Dinosaur definitely also belongs to be in the tier 2 category. So ignoring the random top 64 dino list going second with like 3 Mystic Mine in Costa Rica, I think Dinosaur this format is going to specifically shine compared to the other formats because of the release of Tellarknight Tolmaeus from the Forbidden and Limited list. So for those of you that don't know, Tolmaeus is basically a free way for any archetype to make something like Infinity that can make a rank 4. However, I'm less interested in the Cyber Dragon Infinity Omni Negate because, let's be real, they have Logia and Dolka if they really need negates, but I'm more interested in Stellar Knight Constellar Diamond. So Constellar Diamond, for those of you that don't know, says during your main phase 2 you can also Exceed summon it by using a Tellarknight Xyz you control, except another copy of itself, which also gains all of its materials. That's not going to really be the most relevant because you're probably not going to be making this turn 2, but you can actually use Tolmaeus to go with a 3 materials on it and quick effect into your opponent's turn. But it says while this card has Exceeds material, neither player can send cards from the deck to the graveyard, and any card that returns from the graveyard to the hand is banished instead. It also says during either player's turn, when a dark monster activates its effect, specifically an opponent's dark monster, you can attach a material from this card to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. This essentially, on top of things like Abyss Dweller being able to be made in this deck, will give you just free wins against the tier matchup, as well as any other graveyard-related archetype or dark archetype. On top of being a 2700 by 2000 body, Constellar Diamond is an insanely strong boss monster that you can go into, as long as you're just able to make Tellarknight Tolmaeus. Plus, I still think a going second build, things like Lightning Storm, Evenly Matched, Triple T, etc. is going to be really strong, especially because Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is still a card and the time rules are still a thing. So next up we have Cyber Dragon, and guys, obviously Cyber Dragon is in the everything else category, but I did want to mention it because Battles of Legend Crystal Revenge did finally give us Clockwork Knight, which says it turns everything on the field into a machine and can be banished from grave to add an Earth Machine from deck, if I recall correctly. So basically, you can go second, special Sidra or normal any Cyber Dragon monster, activate Clockwork Knight, and then use it and all of your opponent's monsters for your Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon, which I think is really funny. It's not going to be tearing up any events anytime soon, but you might see it, steal a top cut slot because people aren't prepared for it in the slightest. Speaking of machine decks, we also have Earth Machine, so I think I'm also going to put Earth Machine in the everything else category. It also did get support in the form of Clockwork Knight, because Clockwork Knight can search any of their Earth Machine cards, including Regulus, which is really nice for an Omni Negate. But with these Shizu cards running around, it is going to be a bit troublesome because a lot of your advantage in Earth Machine comes from your graveyard, especially, with your things that shuffle back into the deck and then draw cards, or your Machina Ruin Force, your Machina Fortress, Citadel. Basically, everything is going to be trying to do things in the graveyard, and if your opponent's using a Shizu cards and interrupting your grave, you're going to be having a really hard time overall, but it can probably still sneak in a few wins here and there. Next up, we have Sprite, and this is going to be the first deck in our Tier 1 category. Obviously, Sprite is one of the only other decks going toe-to-toe with Tier right now, specifically due to the ability to either outgrind the Tier player or play the Bestial cards, or I think the Runic cards are still a bit funny in my opinion. But mainly just the Sprite engine plus the Bestial cards being able to disrupt Tier enough to build up advantage more than the Tier player, because that's just kind of how Sprite works. Like, you're using your small Sprite, like one card combos, right? Like the Sprite Starter, the Nimble Beavers, stuff like that, to set up your own resource engine along with multiple Omni Negates in the form of Toad, which people still think Toad can't be made in Sprite, which you're sorely mistaken because Sprin just doesn't care about it at all. But you're just using your little bit of engine cards to go into your Sprite package and get your resource game going, while using things like hand traps and board breakers like the Bestials specifically to make your opponent unable to play for even a brief period, and any bit of advantage that you give Sprite or any of the other decks starting from Power of the Elements format is basically going to be your downfall, because they're just going to out-resource grind you over and over, and they're just going to build the advantage until they can slowly chip away at you for game. They also don't really care too much about cards like Macro and Dimension Fissure, and in fact, I believe they play Shifter as well still in their side deck to prepare for the Tier matchup, so that is also a way you can play Sprite. And so it won't really be affected by too many of the Shifter-like effects going into the next format, and I still think it's going to be one of the better decks to play, especially with the unlimited printing of Power of the Elements, making it a lot cheaper to access. God, this tier list just sounds so scuffed. I'm kind of like talking out of my ass right now. Next up, we have Invoked variants, and Invoked, yeah, this is not your format, guys. I'll put it in everything else because you can still play it with Tier cards, but with Tier running around, Super Poly running around, the Ishizu cards shuffling back your Alistair, this is not the format to be playing Invoked, guys. Like, even with all the milling, like putting more Alistairs in your grave, as long as they're all getting shuffled back or your invocations are getting shuffled back, you're not going to be having a very good time. Also, sitting on one Omni and Winda isn't going to be enough this format, because of just droplet and stuff running around. People just do not care. Speaking of normal summon, though, we have a Luber here with the branded Despia, or just branded strategies in general, and I think I'm going to put it above Dinosaur but below Tri-Brigade. I feel like branded Despia and other branded variants, like branded Bestial specifically, are still very good in this format. They can actually play around things like Shifter really well, things like Tragedy and Ad Libitum also triggering when they're banished is really nice. I think because of that, people are still going back to Dramaturge, which is interesting. But the sheer synergy that this archetype has with the Bestial cards, much like the Dragon Link strategy, is really nice, especially because the Bestials are just so good this format. It's just such a recursive deck that can also just play around so many different problem cards in the format, and they can also take advantage of things like Super Poly themselves, which always is really nice. Also, Mirror Jade and Board Nuke is still nothing to scoff at, even though the Ishizu tier players aren't really going to care as much. Any other archetype is going to have a very hard time against that. I think right now is just like a bit of a more difficult format for branded Despia overall, but I feel like the more hits that tier ends up getting, the more that branded Despia will be able to shine. Next up, we have Sword Soul, and guys, Sword Soul is just, this is not the format for it right now. I feel like I'm actually tempted. I feel like because of the ability to just go into Dweller and then Diamond as well, I'm gonna put it below Dinosaur. Like, it just sounds crazy, but between the shifter-like effects, which, I mean, you can technically tech shifter in Sword Soul, but it is still going to hurt you a bit. But between that, between all the graveyard hate with the Ishizu cards and the Bystials hitting your Vishuda and your Ashuna, and then obviously, again, the Ishizu stuff hitting your Adhara and everything else, you're just going to have a real bitch of a time. Not to mention that your best play against Tyr is to make Draco Berserker of the Tenyi, and Sword Soul Blackout, which is one of the strongest cards, especially going through cards like Dark Ruler or Droplet, is just... Tyr just laughs at Blackout, guys. They really could not care less. Like, I know Sword Soul's getting the top here and there, but it just really does not feel very good to play right now. And I feel like you'd be better off just putting the mantle down and picking up something else. Something that is new to the tier list, at least for the first time in many months, is going to be Madolche. So I think Madolche is seriously slept on right now. So there's a Madolche list or two going around right now that shows just how different the deck plays, especially given that there's like no Salon or anything like that, but it is chock full with Vernisylphs and Ishizu cards. So Madolche being able to take advantage of the Ishizu cards, even just a small package of the Keldos, Mudoras, and like 1 to 3 Kelbecks, as well as the Vernisylphs being able to just give them so much advantage from the graveyard, is huge. Not only is this a rank 4 archetype, meaning of course you can play things like the Ptolemaeus, you can play things like Dweller, with the archetype's own Madolche Glass Souffle, allowing you to not only turn any of your monsters into a towers, which Tyr has a very hard time outing, but also being able to be chained to the Tyr Limit's mill effect, for example, normal summon Merly, activate effect to mill, chain Glass Souffle, detaching to make something to towers. You can also just go in a new chain when they go to fusion summon. You can return up to, I believe, 2 cards from either graveyard into the deck. So you can basically just hit both like a Havdis or a Shamer Trigger Engrave at the same time, which is massive. And of course with the Ishizu cards also doing similar things, as well as keeping your own graveyard clear, which is very crucial for the Madolche cards, I think Madolche is super cool to play right now. Oh yeah, fun fact, it also can play Shifter. Between that and the consistency given to it by the 1-card combos, the Small Worlds, the Prosperities, any package that you really want to play, and the Vernisylphs of course, and the ability to play Barrier Statue if you really want, I think Madolche is in a really good spot right now and is definitely something that can take you off of your feet if you're not prepared for it. Another sleeper deck of the format is definitely going to be the Pendulum archetype, the Draco Slayers, that's what they are. Sorry, my head blanked out for a second there. So yeah, what do I think of Draco Slayer? Maybe I'll put it above Dinosaur. I feel like Draco Slayer still isn't quote-unquote solved. I feel like most people just still aren't really looking at it. It's not really on their radar. And of course, Anti-Spell is still running around, but I do think it is a little bit slept on. I think being able to abuse not once per turns is really funny. Also, searching Secret Village to stop board breakers is also really nice, and Necro Valley, of course, being so good against Tyr right now. And then also just making a standard, you know, I think it's like Savage, Apo, stuff like that in board, and then maybe... Do they play Time Pendulum Graph? I don't remember if they play Time Pendulum Graph or like a Magician Engine or anything like that. But I just do know that they can abuse things like World Sea Dragon Zeolantis, which I think is a super fun card to abuse their not once per turn effect of all of their extra deck monsters. And I just think being able to use loops like that to make an end board is really nice. Not much to say there. I'm not too educated on it, but I do think that it is something that people are kind of sleeping on right now. Next up, we have Drytron, and poor Drytron. Man, yeah, I'm gonna put it below Invoked variants, I guess, because Invoked variants usually have other engines they can at least play with. Drytron is just sad right now. You know, you got Shifter, Dimensional Fissure at 3, Macro at 3, all of the Bystials, the Ishizu cards. Now is just not the time to be playing Drytron. Sorry, Chris. Ooh, I forgot to mention, by the way, be on the lookout for an Ishizu Vernisylph Madolche list coming onto the channel hopefully this month. I can't really confirm anything, but I am trying to get with Javon with both of our schedules as busy as they are, or, you know, as busy as his is, because I just sit on my ass and make videos all day. But I'm trying to get his list up here soon once he gets it completed, because I really want to show you guys how he's been doing. Speaking of Shifter, Macro, Dimensional Fissure, Bystials, Ishizu cards, yeah, we have Eldritch. Eldritch is, I'll put it above Invoked, because I still think being able to play things like There Can Be Only One, Goes In, Rivalry, everything like that, you know, you can still absolutely shit on people. Skill Drain, obviously. You can absolutely shit on people with these floodgates and still get free wins, though it is definitely made a lot harder as of right now due to all the Bystials and all the other graveyard hate running around. Next up, we have Flunder, and I'm going to be putting Flunder above Sprite, so Personally, I think macro to 3 and die-fi to 3 isn't going to change much about Flunder, because it is still like a bunch of bricks in an archetype that has to draw combo in order to play. I feel like they're just going to play 3 of one of them. 3 macro is really nice by banishing everything, but 3-dimensional fissure is really nice by hitting only the monsters, and also allowing you to still have targets in your grave for Stree, as well as being able to technically use it go second. So I feel like that's probably going to be the way to go, maybe 3 die-fi in the main, 3 macro in the side. But also with Herald of Orange Light being at 1 now, making it a lot harder for your shifter to be hit by the Orange Light in general, is going to be a lot better for Flunder, at least in terms of resolving their shifter, which is, again, still kind of an auto-win button half the time, as long as they have any sort of combo. And so I don't think much is going to change. I think Flunder is definitely still going to be a tier 1 deck. So next up, we have Exo Sister. So I still firmly stand by the fact that if you want to play an anti-tier / graveyard hate deck, just play Flu, guys. Like, don't waste all of your money, like, dumping into the Exo Sister cards just to play, like, a slightly worse version of Flu, let's be real. Yeah, they can probably take advantage of the Floodgate cards better, things like Necro Valley and such, but overall, their end boards just aren't strong enough. They just don't lock out enough. So if you don't see those Floodgate cards, you're going to be in for a really bad time by getting, like, what? I think it's, like, 2 banishes, maybe 3 on their end board, and that's about it. Like, yeah, they can go into their, I think it's, what, a Sophiel that's, like, the Abyss Dweller effect or whatever, but, I mean, that's just not really enough in my opinion. I still feel like Exo Sister is an incredibly mid deck, but I mean, people are still going to keep playing it, so it's still going to be seeing relevance, at least in some way, shape, or form. So next up we have Castoria. This is a new addition to the list. This is pre-Photon Hypernova, and I think just because it is still, even without all of the new support, it is still a very obnoxious lockdown deck, I think I'm going to be putting it in the tier 2 category, just above the Tri-Brigade strategies. So, of course, being able to take advantage of Shifter, Macro, Die-Fi, all of those cards like that, without bricking too much is still very nice. Admittedly, the deck isn't as consistent, like nearly as much, as it will be once Photon Hypernova comes out, but being able to block off your opponent's zones, on top of being able to banish a bunch of things, on top of being able to abuse things like Barrier Statue with the Raid Raptor Arsenal Falcon, all of these factors are making the archetype actually a lot stronger than people are expecting right now. And with so many people playing just things like 1 copy of the Kit Kalos, Roll Kalos, etc., being able to rip those with the Unicorn is really solid. And funnily enough, even before Hypernova with the Tier 11's Castoria, we're actually starting to see Castoria variants of Tier already going around, which I think is very intriguing to see. Of course, the archetype is definitely probably going to bump up into the Tier 1 category once Photon Hypernova comes out, but even now, I definitely think it is an archetype that you're going to have to see a lot more of, even right now in the Tier 2 category. Next up, guys, we have Virtual World, and I want to be nice to Virtual World, especially because they can still play like certain Floodgate cards, but I'm going to have to put them below Eldritch just because Eldritch can play like so many more. Playing an archetype that can even remotely brick right now, at least at a consistent basis, funnily, like, how can you be inconsistent consistently is like my funny thing. But even with cards like Shen being really nice, as well as having other like ways to play against tier, especially with things like Invoked Kaliga, it's just really not the time to be playing Virtual World. I still feel like there are a few cards short of being able to be like super relevant again, and I would love to see Virtual World actually be a top deck once more. But, you got so many things going around, like Shifter can really hurt even though they don't mind their stuff being banished as much. You got things like the Ishizu card shuffling back all of their things like Qinglong and all of their graveyard extenders like Nyan. Basically, it's going to be Shen, Chu-Chi, Floodgate, Turbo, and even then, that's just not going to be really saving them as much as they'd like. I'm coping for you, Virtual World players, it's just the loss of Halkin and Chaos Ruler and everything with the Punk engine just makes it a lot worse. So next up, we have Math Mech, and man, Math Mech. I'm still confident in the deck, and it technically did squeeze in a top 32 cut, I believe, somewhere. Actually, I don't think it did. No, I'm thinking of a different thing, sorry. Math Mech didn't, I don't think, get a top cut rep in Costa Rica, but Math Mech is still a really cool deck in my opinion. I'm still gonna put it above the Draco Slayer strategy in tier 2. I think it is still a really good deck. The problem is just like, of course, like the Bestial cards and the Shifter and everything like that. But when you're playing things like the Adventurer package or any other packages like that, you can actually still do a lot of different things with the Math Mech strategy. And the Math Mech cards being able to give you a 1-card OTK is actually a lot more slept on than people understand. Like, you can have a hand of entirely board breakers, you know, Lightning Storm, Evenly, Triple T, Dark Ruler, Forbidden Droplet, stuff like that. Like, anything like that, and then plus Mech Circular, you have game there. As long as you don't have Dark Ruler preventing your opponent from dying, you have game with just Circular. And I think people just aren't really understanding that. You can definitely play a going second board breaker version of Mech with archetypes such as the Adventure strategy or any other OTK archetype, or just anything that can help you play through the Shifter, Bestial, stuff like that. I think Mech is definitely still a deck that you can play, and we do have a Mech Adventure deck profile up on the channel with our friend M-Rocket if you want to check that out. Again, shameless plug because, you know, I like money. But I do think Mech is just something that you shouldn't be looking down upon too much strictly because of all the graveyard hate. So next up we have Anchoria. So Anchoria is very interesting because it was actually a really hyped up, you know, rogue slash fun-ish sort of deck for the format that did a lot of similar things to the other Ishizu strategies by just, you know, or Ishizu Vernasil strategies, I should say, and facilitates so much advantage. Admittedly, it does get hurt a lot by things like Shifter and the addition of more graveyard hate stuff, but I do still want to put it below Castoria. Admittedly, I do think that this archetype is really, really strong. You know, things like Mole Cricket and everything are just insanely good. Like, every single new Anchoria card that got released in Darkwing Blast is just absolutely insane. Not to mention, of course, the Vernasilf and Ishizu packages are also really strong on their own, as well as combined with the Anchoria cards. The main issue is definitely just the graveyard hate, but a way that people have been playing around the graveyard hate, at least a little bit, is to package a small runic engine into the deck, which, you know, obviously it doesn't really like not hitting the graveyard as well, but it is definitely a way to play around, you know, losing your graveyard entirely by still facilitating a small resource engine with the runic cards. Also, banishing stuff off the top of your opponent's deck is still really good, and I think the runic engine is still very strong. Like, I don't know why people just immediately decided to drop off of it, when the runic engine can just get rid of so many tier names from the top of your opponent's deck. It's insane. But yeah, I think Anchoria is definitely still a sleeper deck to look out for, or at least a deck that I think is going to be seeing a lot of the tier 2 category success, and don't be surprised if you see it taking top cuts here and there. So next up we have Dragon Link, specifically, you know, Bestial Dragon Link and stuff like that. Man, I really don't want to keep filling up the tier 2 category, but I also don't want to put them in everything else. Like, I'll be generous and I'll put them above probably Madolche, maybe. And I'll put them above Mech. So Dragon Link actually is doing really cool with the Bestial cards. However, they suffer from just about every single Floodgate card in the format. Things like Dimensional Fissure, Macro Cosmos, I'm pretty sure Constellar Diamond hurts them really bad as well. The Bestials are also very obnoxious. They get their back completely blown out by Super Poly. Overall, I've noticed that Dragon Link end boards are just surprisingly easy to break, and even though they have a lot of 1 to 1.5 card combos, they somehow still end up breaking a lot. And it just really isn't the best time to be playing Dragon Link right now. Maybe if tier starts to die down a little bit, I feel like the deck will go up a little bit, because the Bestial package just makes the archetype a lot stronger. However, I just feel like if you want to play the Bestials, just go ahead and play something like Branded. Next up, we have Sky Striker, and Sky Striker did just get linkage and a bunch of other things coming out of Magnificent Mavens that make the archetype a lot cooler. However, they are still not in the best of spots. Admittedly, losing your Rays and Roses repeatedly to Bestial cards and like Ishizu cards and stuff like that, and then losing all of your spells as well to the Ishizu cards, as well as things like Shifter and a bunch of other factors, just making the archetype a lot harder to actually play. And of course, with Mystic Mine actually being gone now, I feel like the archetype is just not in the best of spots, though I do think the linkage OTK is very cool. Finally, we have Marincess, and I mean, I do want to put Marincess above Striker because they do admittedly get to play around things like the Bestials like perfectly, but they do still get hurt by the Ishizu stuff, and they can't really take advantage of any Floodgate cards that aren't like, I don't know, it just goes in. Admittedly, it is really cool when the Ishizu cards do mill all of your extenders and all of your follow-up cards, But when they're also shuffling back all your follow-up cards, and when you're running into things like Shifter and the Barrier statue especially, you're just not in for the best of times when playing Marincess, even though the Zolantis lock, I'll admit, is really cool. Well, everybody, I think that's going to do it for my tier list for the December 2022 format post-Forbidden and Limited list. So I know this was a little bit scuffed. I kind of just ran in here without a plan, and I sat here for like an hour waiting to try and get Costa Rica Top Cut results to get like information without realizing that it doesn't really matter anyway, considering we're moving into a new format roughly. But I do still hope you enjoyed anyway. I know you're probably going to tell me about the things that I did wrong in the comments, and just go ahead and do that. Just prepare for me to like violently back up my point. I feel like maybe you could probably bump this up into tier 1 depending on what we end up seeing. I don't know just yet. But, I don't know, I feel like this is overall a good, or at least a decent rough estimate of what you can be expected to see in this format. I think that the ban list did some pretty cool stuff by banning Mystic Mine and limiting the Herald of Orange Light, and of course giving us Tellarknight Tolmaeus, but we'll just have to see how it shapes up in the format. But until then, that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll put this video and the channel into YouTube recommended. And if you like this content and you want to see more like it, like the rest of my tier list, I try to make one every single month, and I try to make some creative tier lists now every once in a while, then perhaps consider subscribing, because we're on our way to 25 subscribers by the end of 2022, which is just a month away, but we are approaching the goal very fast. Thank you all so much for that. Not to mention that it supports the channel more than anything else, and it is absolutely free. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.